Newlands, by Charles Hoyfort, Part 2, Chapter 32G. In the London Times, November 23, 1905, a correspondent writes that, at East Liss, Hampshire, which is about 40 miles from Reading, he and his gamekeeper had, about 3:30 p.m., November 17, heard a loud, distant rumbling. According to this hearer, the rumbling seemed to be a composition of triplets of sound. We shall accept that 3 sounds were heard, but we have no other assertion that each sound was itself so sub-serialized. This correspondent's gamekeeper said he had heard similar sounds at 11:30 a.m. and at 1:30 p.m. It is said that the sounds were not like gunfire, and that the direction from which they seemed to come, and the time in the afternoon, precluded the explanation of artillery practice at Aldershot or Portsmouth. Aldershot is about 15 miles from East Liss, and Portsmouth about 20. Times, November 24th, that the quake had been distinctly felt in Reading, about 3:30 p.m., November 17th. Times, November 25th, heard at Reading, at 11:30, 1:30, and 3:30 o'clock, November 17th. Reading Standard, November 25th. That consternation had been caused in Reading, upon the 17th, by sounds and vibrations of the earth, about 11:30 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 3:30 p.m. It is said that nothing had been seen, but that the sounds closely resembled those that had been heard during the meteoric shower of 1866. Mr. Herbert George Fordham appears again. In the Times, December 1st, he writes that the phenomena pointed clearly to an explosion in the sky, and not to an earthquake of subterranean origin. The noise and shock experienced are no doubt attributable to the explosion or to more than one explosion of a meteorite or bolide high up in the atmosphere, and setting up a wave, or waves, of sound and aerial shock. It is probable, indeed, that a good many phenomena having this source are wrongly ascribed to slight and local earthshock. Mr. Fordham wrote this, but he wrote no more, and I think that somewhere else something else was written, and that, in the year 1905, it had to be obeyed, and that it may be interpreted in these words, "Thou shalt not." Mr. Fordham did not inquire into the reasonableness of thinking that, only by coincidence, meteors so successively exploded, in a period of 4 hours, in one local sky of this earth, and nowhere else, and into the inference, then, as to whether this earth is stationary or not. We have data of a succession occupying far more than 4 hours. In the Times, Mrs. Lane of Petersfield, 20 miles from Portsmouth, writes that, at 11:30 a.m. and at 3:30 p.m., several days before the 17th, she had heard detonations, then hearing them again upon the 17th. Mrs. Lane thinks that there must have been artillery practice at Portsmouth. It seems clear that there was no cannonading anywhere in England at this time. It seems clear that there was signaling from some other world. In the English Mechanic, Volume 82, page 433, Joseph Clark writes that, a few minutes past 3 p.m., upon the 18th, a triplet of detonations was heard at Somerset, as loud as thunder, but not exactly like thunder. Reading Observer, November 25th, that, according to a correspondent, the sounds had been heard again, at Whitechurch, 20 miles from Reading, upon the 21st, at 1:35 p.m., and 3:08 p.m. The sounds had been attributed to artillery practice at Aldershot, but the correspondent had written to the artillery commandant at Bulford Camp, and had received word that there had been no heavy firing at the times of his inquiry. The editor of the Observer says that he, too, had written to the commandant, and had received the same answer. I have searched widely. I have found record of nobody's supposition that he had traced these detonations to origin upon this earth.